All right, now let's move into one of the deepest parts of the whole show because this is where we stop using music only as entertainment or nostalgia and start using it consciously as a psychological tool. And tonight's topic connects perfectly with the video we just watched from Chuck Morgan because tonight we are talking about something many people experience silently, and that is emotional exhaustion while continuing to function normally. So picture this: you wake up, you work, you answer messages, you pay bills, you fulfill responsibilities, you continue moving, but internally, something slowly feels disconnected. And one of the most dangerous forms of exhaustion is the kind that still allows you to remain functional. Because when people completely collapse emotionally, at least they notice something is wrong. But many people today are operating in a strange middle state, still functioning externally while internally feeling increasingly empty. So, tonight's first song representing this emotional state, that would be the problem we want to fix, would be Running on Empty by Jackson Brown. And even the title itself says almost everything. Running on empty. And psychologically, this is exactly how chronic emotional overload often feels. You keep moving, but the emotional fuel is gone. And many people become so accustomed to stress that they stop asking themselves, uh, am I actually emotionally alive right now? They only ask, am I surviving? And modern culture reinforces this constantly by saying, keep producing, keep optimizing, keep pushing, keep performing, right? Even when emotionally exhausted. And one thing I found really important in Shaq Morgan's video is this idea that many people become trapped in permanent delayed gratification, saying to themselves, I will rest later, I will enjoy life later, I'll reconnect with myself later, I will feel alive later. And eventually, later becomes years. So, this happens very easily during adulthood, especially for responsible people, because responsible people often become extremely good at suppressing themselves. And psychologically, that's dangerous in the long term. Not because responsibility is bad, not at all. Responsibility matters, family matters, work matters, community matters, all the roles that we play in society. But also, your emotional vitality matters, all of it. Uh, One of the biggest psychological dangers today is not only stress itself, it's forgetting who you are underneath the stress. And I think many people recognize this feeling when you become the worker, the provider, the problem solver, the reliable one, while slowly losing contact with your curiosity, with your sense of playfulness, or with your passion, your creativity, with your being spontaneous. And eventually life starts feeling emotionally mechanical, so to speak. And that's why tonight's second song is really important. The song that will remind us about the solution. And that is Don't Forget Me When I'm Gone by Glass Tiger. Of course, and the original song is about relationships, right? But psychologically, I think the title can also be interpreted another way. Don't forget me, and by using and tonight the me in the don't forget me phrase is actually you. So don't completely forget yourself. Don't abandon every part of yourself in exchange for functioning in society. And I think many adults slowly disappear psychologically without realizing it. Not physically, but emotionally. They stop creating and playing or trying new things or moving forward, dreaming, exploring. Uh, in other words, feeling excitement. And eventually, life becomes only maintenance. So, tonight's practical psychological tool is something I would call schedule identity recovery. That's for putting a name. But it's much simpler than it sounds. It means intentionally reintroducing small pieces of yourself back into your life before burnout becomes severe. Not waiting for the giant crisis, the emotional collapse, the breakdown, or the falling into total exhaustion, but proactively protecting emotional vitality. And this can be surprisingly small. Listening to music intentionally instead of passively, going back to an old hobby you had, walking without your phone for 20 minutes, drawing, uh, even skating, like Jack mentioned, playing the piano or any musical instrument, watching old movies that makes you feel good, talking with old friends, creating something useless just because you enjoy it. And psychologically, these activities matter much more than people think because they reconnect identity. And many people today don't need constant productivity, they need reconnection. And this doesn't mean abandoning responsibilities. That's important because sometimes internet culture swings too far into just escape everything. That's not healthy either. The goal is balance, to get balance, being responsible, but without emotionally erasing yourself completely, not removing yourself from the equation of life. I think that that balance became increasingly difficult during modern life, especially with constant internet stimulation, constant comparison, constant economic anxiety, constant performance pressure. And maybe that's one reason music nostalgia affects people so deeply emotionally, because songs reconnect us temporarily, momentarily with forgotten version of ourselves. A song suddenly reminds someone who they were before that burnout, before that emotional exhaustion, before their routine consumed everything in their lives. And sometimes that is why people cry listening to old songs, not only because of memories in itself, but because they reconnect with emotional states they miss inside themselves. So tonight, instead of remembering complicated psychological terminology, remember these two songs. Running on Empty, that would be the warning sign. You can use it as the warning sign when you are feeling these these feelings. And then remember, don't forget me when I'm gone. That would be the reminder not to abandon yourself emotionally. So the first song represents depletion, and the second song represents reconnection. So music is powerful for this because Songs are emotionally memorable in ways psychology textbooks usually are not. So this is a way of making a, a complex tool easier to understand, to digest, and to remember and to apply. That is what I'm intending to do with this segment, to bring value to the community in this form. So tell me honestly in the chat or in the comment section, what's one passion, hobby, or activity you used to love that adulthood slowly pushed away? And maybe this week, try reconnecting with at least a tiny piece of it again, even for 1 hour. Because life does become heavy sometimes. It's true, that's real. But people, we are not machines. And emotionally, surviving modern life requires more than productivity. It also requires meaning, atmosphere, identity, recover our playfulness, to rest, requires good music, connection, and moments where you feel emotionally alive again. All right, everyone. That was tonight's tools for this times segment, and now we are moving into the final emotional stretch of tonight's show. That is the editorial. Um, right after this short recess.